Hello, everyone. A very good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the YouTube channel of Get It Law by IMS. I'm your verbal ability mentor, Sanjana ma'am. And today we are coming with the third session as part of a weekly practice. We've already had two sessions previously. So, for those who want to amp up their practice for CLAT, those two sessions are going to be very helpful. The first one is on English language, and the second one is on legal reasoning. Today, we shall be solving two passages on logical reasoning, and the passages that I'll be presenting would be pretty much, modeled on CLAT passages, if you go by the last 2, 3 year standards, right? So we'll just wait for a couple of minutes, wait for everybody to join, and then right off the bat, we can begin with our session today. The passages included are definitely going to be very helpful. I have tried to include every sort of question also there, right? Something that can help you build up your concepts for critical reasoning, because this happens to be a problematic section for a lot of you. All right, I'll be sharing the screen now and we can begin with the practice. All right, here we have the first passage. Now, this is all. Whatever you are able to view on the screen, this is the length of the passage. And generally, for a passage which is of such a brief nature, I would suggest go through the entire passage. Don't skim unless you're really confident of your reading comprehension skills. Otherwise, I think it would only do you well to be able to read everything given here. So, the first line here itself is quite potent because it will give you some understanding of what the entire passage is going to be about. It already says the news cycle has changed. But what remains to be seen is, has it changed, from positive perspective or a negative perspective? So again, I'm just going to highlight the keywords. This is something that I generally do, right? So it says there is now more news aggregation, different opinion pieces are there. There's a diversity of news, right? Opinion pieces from ideologically opposing viewpoints, right? Contrasting viewpoints. Then you also have analysis these days. You also have data, you have visuals and straight news, right? More than ever in the media ecosystem today. Right. Then again, some more keywords are there. And all of this so far is telling me something positive about the change. So I'm not jumping the gun and automatically assuming that, the passage might contain some information casting news in the negative light here. So it says there's speed now, there's immediacy of reporting, breaking news, and they have never been more important. And at the same time, what do I always tell my students is focus on howevers, focus on buts, yes, although, right? These are transition words. Yet, quality writing and long form pieces, they have never found a wider audience than now, which means we still have a substantial portion of the audience who still believe in quality writing. Maybe they prioritize quality over quantity, right? When I'm saying maybe, this is just my inference from it. Right. Now, another thing that has changed, another aspect that has changed about news or the media is the way it is consumed now. How do we consume information? If one is not satisfied with a particular piece of information, we can look up another source almost immediately, right? To cross check information, to verify for fact checking purposes, right? To understand a different point of view. So far, nothing negative that I can take from the passage. At the same time, it also says today there is direct accountability for news items. Critique is omnipresent. It is also instant. It's everywhere. It's sure to happen. It's inevitable. So the moment you come up with something contentious, you can, readily expect that you'll be called out for it sooner than later. So it says a media house knows that its credibility is online every single day. And if it has a diversion or a slant, it will be called out sooner than later. Now, I feel that the second paragraph here, you will see a slight change in tone. So for the first part, I would say it's almost objective, but slightly bordering on, the positives of the change that we are seeing. But for the second one here, it says the entry barrier to the world of media have changed, right? It is less expensive to set up one's own media platform, which means everybody can come up with different sources now with potentially universal reach. Today, than at any point in history, the pressure to respond to what the reader is perceived to want overwhelms the need to inform, and this is a very important piece of information, and educate the audience. So, what it's trying to say is that the media industry, the different news outlets, they are under mounting pressure to be able to give that sort of news to the readers which they want, right? So, ideally or naturally, the readers are more likely to flock towards sources that will only reinforce their views. So, if I want a particular stand on a particular, topic or a political news, I would, naturally lean towards those sources which will help me, cement my opinion. I wouldn't want multiplicity of opinions here. So this is problematic. Even though the word problematic is not explicitly mentioned here, but this is what you can understand, that instead of the newspaper creating a nation as in bringing about union or unity in the nation through impartial news or fact based news, the world of segmented digital news is actually a creation of separation of nations in a way. And this inherently is going to tell you the problem with how the news cycle has changed. So the first paragraph actually focuses on the positive, the second paragraph focuses on the negative, right? So there is more of separation of nations that is happening instead of unity of nations, differing not only over interpretation, but also facts all talking past each other. That's it. That is all there is to the passage. I took slightly longer because I had to explain some important points. But obviously, if for you, you're able to solve this within a minute, 1.5, that's more than enough. And do not give such a passage more than 2 minutes. And that includes reading and understanding and being able to have these important pointers on your fingertips. That is what impactful, effective reading is. Okay. Focus on the first question now. So it says the argument that news media have to give the viewer. All right, which argument are we talking about? Whenever you feel the question seems perplexing, break down the question into smaller parts. So it says the argument. Which argument? I'll just put, hyphen here. It says that news media have to give the viewer what he wants rather than inform, right? Rather than give them facts and just give them what they want. Presupposes that. So presupposes is nothing but them asking you to figure out the assumption. So here you have the assumption question now. Look at A. Quantity has not translated into quality. So this is explicitly mentioned in the passage. That's the first thing. Assumption is an unstated premise. It is something which is supposed to be hidden. It's supposed to be latent. That which is explicitly mentioned, do not choose it, right? So I'm canceling option A. I might come back to it if I don't feel there is any better option than it. But I do have hope. Look at B. It says informative journalism will not be well received. The students remember when we talk about assumption, and let's just say when you're confused as to what could be the possible answer, rely on the assumption negation technique. Option B says informative journalism will not be well received. What is informative journalism? Journalism that's unbiased, journalism that's impartial, journalism which is more fact based and something that does not help you reaffirm your views. So informative journalism will not be well received. This here is the correct assumption, because if it is well received, then news media will never feel compelled or pressurized to give to the viewer what the viewer wants, and just report fact based, pure facts to the readers here. But here, the assumption is that informative journalism is generally not appreciated by readers today, which is why news media are under pressure to just give to them what they want to hear. This here is a correct assumption. Beautiful question. Look at C. The diversity of news media outlets is in want of more news, which is not the best assumption to support it. Always, whenever you want to talk about assumption is that which bridges the gap between the premise and the conclusion, right? So the point which actually takes care of this gap here will be option B, right? So you can cancel option C also. Not that it's necessarily wrong, but it's not that related to it. And the reach of social media is overpowering. In fact, nowhere in the passage social media is, talked about so much. Not a lot of importance has been given to it. So cancel option D. We'll move on to the next question now. And this should be an easy one. It's about the central idea. So you have to strike a balance. generally for a central idea, main idea question, always focus on the culmination of the passage, the manner in which the passage concludes. And the passage concludes by highlighting that there is a gap, there is a lacuna that needs to be filled, where quantity is not translating into quality. These were the keywords, right? And at the same time, the media, all they are doing is now just reporting to the readers what they want to hear. Instead of bringing about unity, they are actually leading to an aggregation of nations, separation of nations, because there is a lot of division in the way the news is being reported. And having said so many lines, by now all of you should be sure that option A is the correct option, not because it's the lengthiest option here, that's never the rule, but because option A here happens to be the correct option choice. Let's still take a look as to why B, C, D are wrong. B says opinion pieces have overtaken factual news in modern media. Now just understand, the main idea is also the idea which you find, being reverberated or repeated throughout the passage. So option B is a little too specific, a little too narrow in scope, right? And slightly extremely worded also. They haven't like completely overtaken factual news, right? But it's too narrow in scope. This is broader. This is more comprehensive. It captures all the keywords. Social media allows anyone to become a journalist. Now, this is a really random option. Do not choose option C, right? Because again, social media is being talked about. It's not so important in the passage. Look at D. Fact checking is no longer valued in digital journalism. Again, even though fact checking is not a priority anymore, but right off the bat saying that it's no longer valued is a little too extreme. Okay, so cancel option D again. Let's focus on the third question. Inference question, which of the following can be inferred from the given passage? Go through the options one by one. A says, most media are driven by quality instead of quantity. I love the rule of quantifiers. Multiple times we have reiterated it in other sessions of mine as well. Nowhere in the passage is it given that most of them, right? Most media are driven by quality instead of quantity. Cancel option A. Indian media's independence. Now, a strong word actually. Indian media's independence is deeply compromised. You might think, ma'am, this does seem a promising option. But again, this is not outrightly, sort of touched on in the passage. Is their independence deeply compromised? You cannot verify from the information given in the passage, right? C says with the proliferation is more like an expansion of media outlets because now entry barriers are really low. Just about anybody could come set up a media outlet, right? So with an expansion of media outlets, reporting is often biased. Now tell me, the second part of the passage, the second paragraph, it is mentioned that with increase in media outlets, these outlets feel increasingly pressurized to give to the readers what they want to hear, right? And therefore naturally the readers are flocking to them so that they act as reinforcers of whatever they believe in. And this can, what we can infer is this can then lead to biased reporting because you're not really respecting facts. You're just trying to sort of, be more sycophantic in your approaches. You're just trying to impress the readers, just give to them what they want to hear, what they want to read. And this is what makes the reporting biased. This is a beautiful inference to draw. Option C is a correct option choice. D says, apart from the nature of journalism, every aspect has changed. In fact, what it's mentioned is the nature of journalism in itself has changed. So D is also wrong here. Let's take a look at the next question. Now, here we have important, always asked in CLAT, strengthen the argument. Now, what do you have to strengthen? That the balkanization of media. Now, you might ask, ma'am, what do we understand from balkanization? The most remote inference I can think about is the Balkan states in Europe, but you don't have to go there. It's just a metaphorical term being used. That balkanization of media leads to a lack of shared understanding and polarization because readers are again just inclined towards certain media outlets. They're not trying to diversify their reading base, right? So it leads to lack shade of understanding, it leads to reduction in unity, and it just furthers a lot of aggregation amongst different reader groups. This was our understanding. So you have to strengthen, you have to buttress the same fact. Let's go through the options one by one. So there's a recent survey which shows that the audiences actively seek out diverse perspectives. if they want diverse perspectives, this will not lead to balkanization, right? This is actually something which weakens our argument here, right? Here in the argument, it's mentioned that the readers are just looking for biased opinions now, something that helps reinforce their views. Here we're talking about diverse perspectives, it weakens. Look at B. Media literacy programs have proven effective in helping audiences critically evaluate. Now, even if you're critically evaluating information, what it implies is that you're trying to be impartial, you're trying to be unbiased. This then again attacks it. It doesn't strengthen, it weakens the argument. Look at C. Cross platform engagement data indicates that individuals predominantly, majorly, or maybe primarily they stick to sources that reinforce their existing beliefs. And let me tell you, reinforce as a keyword is already mentioned. Quite easy to solve. C is the correct option, right? They're just wanting to flock towards sources that are only reinforcing their existing beliefs. This is exactly what will help to buttress the argument here. This is the correct option, option C. D says collaborative initiatives among media outlets have succeeded. Again, you see, even if you want, you can skim through the options. Diverse perspectives it directly weakens and doesn't strengthen. So, correct option for this question is option C. Take a look at the fifth one. Now, according to me, this is a great question. Very, I would say, decision making or let's say application based question. So consider the challenges outlined in the passage regarding the pressure to cater to reader preferences and the balkanization of media. So what possible course of action can we choose to address the situation, right? Look at it, mandating that media outlets prioritize content that aligns with government approved narratives. Don't you think this too will ultimately lead to biased reporting? Because you are obliging to the government norms then. So how is this leading to impartial reading or diversity of facts, right? So it's really wrong. So option A is incorrect. B says you have to establish an independent media watchdog. And the function is that it will ensure the unbiased representation of diverse perspectives. To me, this takes care of the problem. If it is ensuring, if it is, almost making sure that there is impartial representation of facts or news on different ideas or beliefs, then it takes care of the job quite well. To me, B seems like the best option choice. I can have my doubts about it, haven't read C and D. Let's read C as well. Restricting the creation of new digital news platforms. You don't have to. See, the problem of the outlets multiplying isn't an issue, right? So, what can you actually do? Even if you restrict the creation of new digital platforms, what about the existing platforms? They might continue to report biased pieces of information. So, C does nothing. And last D, which you feel, ma'am, I thought that I was inclined towards D. It says implementing a system of financial incentives for media outlets that produce content promoting a shared understanding and diverse viewpoints. According to me, when you want to tackle a decision making based question, generally do not go for options where we're sort of providing financial incentives, right? Because ultimately, again, people are literally doing something because they're getting money out of it. So they have vested interest in it, right? It does not, in a very impartial way, take care of the situation. There is still some biasness. There might be some biasness because you're being paid, right? You are being incentivized. So D is actually a wrong option to choose. B for Bombay here is the correct option choice. And look at question 6 again. This is also an inference question, but a negative inference. The author is asking which of the following are we going to disagree with? A, media houses are being subjected to intense scrutiny. The first paragraph does say, right, that critique is instant, right? The media houses are now accountable. They'll be called out sooner than later. So this is inferred, hence out. Media houses feed in the news that readers want to hear. Multiple times we have discussed the same line. We already have 2, 3 questions based on the same idea. So this 2 is given, cancel option B. C says readers and viewers have become an integral part of news exercise. And this 2 is important because readers are there, viewers are also there. You cannot cancel option D, honestly. Like, this is more of an underlying idea which we can take for granted. So option C2 is out. And what we're left with by default has to be the correct option. It says the powerful are worry of the media. Nowhere is it given that the powerful are cautious of the media. We're not even talking about this line. You go back to the passage, nowhere is it even mentioned. D is the correct option choice. This is something we cannot infer from the passage. So this was about the first passage. I think if you have scored a full 6 on 6, you're well on your path to do well in the logical reasoning section. All of you who were solving the questions along with me, you can let me know in the chat box how many of you have gotten all 6 questions correct, right? Or you could also tell me about your scores. It could be a 3 on 6, 4 on 6, 5 on 6. Let's now get discussing the second passage for today. And this passage has a slightly philosophical take to it. Might not be very difficult to read. No fancy words have been thrown here, but still you can feel confused here. So this says if you don't have the courage to commit a crime, it doesn't mean you're moral for not doing it. It just means you're afraid, right? You can see this to some degree in mob violence. People riot because they don't think they'll get caught. They're not law abiding because they're moral. They're law abiding because they're afraid of punishment. Moral of the story is that being moral has nothing to do with, being afraid, right? And the author in this passage questions what true morality is then, right? What is true morality? Just because I refuse to partake in a criminal act, does it make me inherently moral? No. Maybe I refuse to do it because I'm a law abiding citizen. I have a sense of fear. I'm afraid of punishment, right? I'm afraid of something that can be done to me. But does it inherently make me moral? Absolutely no. Then again, according to Nietzsche, who was very careful to distinguish between mere obedience and morality. What is true morality? And this is exactly what gets explored in the second paragraph here. It says he thought of obedience not always as a form of cowardice. So every obedience is not necessarily meaning that you're a coward, right? Obedience, because it can also come from a source or a sense of discipline, right? So just because I'm obedient does not always mean that I'm a coward. Maybe I'm also a disciplined person, right? But not committing a crime because you're too afraid to, but it doesn't speak to the essence of morality. Now, when you read further, the author says he has happened to know a certain individual who was a really dangerous person, right? And why does he use the word dangerous? Because he had a lot of power, but still he was always, obedient. He tried to be a good disciplinarian. He has worked with a certain number of delinquents, people who have erred, people who have faltered, and still he's a good disciplinarian. He has a certain sense of control, internal control over here, right? But he's also a very compassionate person. He's also a moral person. So according to Nietzsche, true morality could also stem from how well you're able to control yourself from doing anything inherently bad. As far as I'm concerned, because there's a real danger to him, but he keeps it under control. And he's not a coward. He's not afraid. He's not weak. Whatever ideas I have mentioned, that in itself will comprise the central idea of the passage, right? And this is such a brief passage, but the questions, they can be really bombastic also. So let's start solving the questions one by one. I will try to, sort of repeat the pointers I used while explaining the passage. Read question 7th. It says, which of the following statements is the writer most likely to agree with? Go through the options one by one. No need to, sit back, think, and then see which could be the possible option, because we will always be running short of time in the paper. He says, morality is determined by behavior. Let me tell you, in the passage, right now, if you want, you can go back to the passage and check. Anywhere is it given that morality is determined by behavior, or anywhere is it given that morality can be determined by anything? Nothing is given, right? It's not mentioned that morality is determined by multiple factors, or in this case, by behavior. Cancel option A, right? This is nothing but an inference question. B says courage is an aspect of morality, and that's true. If you're a disciplinarian, you have discipline, then you can also be said to have courage. And this is something we can infer from the passage. B is the correct option. C says being moral is a difficult choice to make. This again is not mentioned. Cancel C. D says cowardice is sometimes practical. This is a point which is sort of inferable from the passage, but it is not a very definite argument to choose, right? So cancel option D. Best option is option B. Next question, it says, and this is a very good application-based question. Based on the ideas of Nietzsche as described in the passage, which of the following would be not considered as mere obedience? So what, according to the passage, is mere obedience? Mere obedience is when you're doing something, or let's just say when you're being obedient out of fear, right? You're being obedient out of a certain, let's just say, punishment, right? So which of the following does not form a part of that mere obedience? Go through the options. Brilliant question. A says attending all classes of a course because the teacher refuses to repeat the content taught in missed classes. So if you're attending it, you're doing it out of fear of missing out on the content. The content can be important. So this also comes within the ambit of mere obedience, right? So we can cancel option A. Look at B. You're following the rules of a commanding officer as insubordination, right? Is a punishable offense, right? Fair enough. Again, you're doing something out of, fear of getting punished, right? So this too comprises mere obedience. B is cancelled. Look at C. Going to a place of worship based on the advice of senior relatives because the social consequences of not going are unpleasant. Again, you're doing something because you fear a certain consequence, right? C is cancelled. What we're left with is D. Read D. Waking up early in the morning to exercise because having an attractive physique obtains admiration from peers. Obtaining admiration from somebody, do you think it's a compulsion? Do you think it's something mandatory? Do you think it is something which, if you do not do, is punishable by a certain act or by law? Nothing. You just want to look good because it's your form of internal discipline. And this, therefore, does not amount to mere obedience. Option D here is a correct option choice. To me, this is a great question. If you've been able to solve this, I think you're quite good at it then, right? Look at question 9. Best essence of the passage, right? Of the last paragraph. Great question. This is very much vocab oriented because it will also test you on your understanding of idioms. So it says, which of the following aphorisms best captures the essence of the last paragraph? In the last paragraph, the author is essentially talking about his friend, whom he happens to know. And the friend is a strict disciplinarian. He's also a very kind and compassionate person. A lot of discipline he has. He's said to be courageous despite being a dangerous person, despite having a lot of power. He can really harm somebody, but he doesn't choose to because he's quite disciplined, right? So, which of the options best describes this sort of personality, right? I'm just trying to simplify the question here. A says a sword that is never taken out of its sheath might as well be a sheath. It talks about uselessness, actually, which means just because I'm not showing power, I'm not flaunting my power, doesn't mean I'm powerless. So, what option A is trying to say is you're useless because you're not able to show power. So, this is not capturing that essence. B says talk softly, which means be compassionate, be courageous, but carry a big stick. So you as an individual, even though you're a very powerful person, you have a lot of potential to harm somebody, to hold that sort of power, but you still want to talk softly. You still don't want to exercise it unnecessarily. You might want to just make productive use of it, right? You're still being compassionate. This captures the essence. Mark B as the correct option choice, right? C says respect those who show you respect. It talks about the theme of reciprocity, right? So I'm being nice to you just because you're being nice to me. This is not given in the last paragraph. Cancel option C. D says you do not have to prove yourself to anyone if you know your own worth. Now, self-worth, self-confidence is not a theme explored in the last paragraph. Cancel D, the best option is option B. Next question. Now, which of the following behaviors will fall under Nietzsche's description of true morality? All right. Very good question. Actually, for this question, the correct option is D. True morality is something that comes from a sense of discipline. You're not really obliging to fear to a certain form of, consequences. You're not scared of anything. A says a suicide bomber kills himself in the name of an authority. So here he's doing it out of loyalty to a certain religious group. So this is not true morality. B says a US fighter pilot bombs an ISIS target, killing several terrorists. because his commander calculated it was an acceptable loss. Again, this is not coming from a sense of discipline. It's coming because you are just sort of being very utilitarian about it, right? You've already been told that it's an acceptable loss. So you're conforming to somebody else's belief system. Option B2 is out. C says there's a brother in northern rural India who kills his sister because her sexual infidelity has contaminated and shamed their family. And death is the only way to restore. Now, this person, in wanting to save the family's honor, is going on about ruthlessly killing his sister. Right? This is not true morality, right? It's coming from a sense of fear, wanting to save your family's honor, a certain sense of obligation. Cancel C. None of the options fit the bill. The correct option is D. None of the above. Look at question 11th. Which of the following options can be inferred from the passage? All right, great question. If a person doesn't commit a crime, he is moral. This is an idea which has already been contested in the passage. This is not true. So A is out because we have to choose that which can be inferred from the passage. B says, a cowardly person will never indulge in any criminal activity. Now, this is not given in the passage, again, out. C says, a dangerous person might be obedient yet disciplined. Does it ring a bell? Yes, we're talking about the friend of the author, right? He was described as a dangerous person, but he's still disciplined. Best option choice to choose. Question 11th was a no-brainer according to me. D says a dangerous person cannot exhibit morality. Again, his friend did exhibit morality, right? He had a strict sense of discipline. He was compassionate also. So cancel D. C is the correct option choice here. And the last question for the passage would be, which of the following statements is true as per the passage? Look at A. All obedient people are moral. Contains the quantifier. Nowhere is it given that everybody who is obedient has to be moral. Similarly, cancel B because all obedient people are immoral. Again, you cannot infer that inconclusivity from the passage. And look at C. Compassion cannot coexist with immorality. It says compassion and immorality are mutually exclusive. They cannot happen simultaneously. Where is it given? And in fact, this topic altogether is not explored in the passage. You can do the math, you can count, you can calculate, you don't have to do it. It will be a very futile attempt to think if C is correct in light of the passage. It's not even explored as an idea. We're not talking about compassion. It's not a theme. It was just mentioned as a characteristic of the author's friend. And what we left with is D, which again has to be the correct option choice. Some obedient people are not immoral, right? And I did explain this statement that there are some obedient people who are moral because they have a sense of discipline. Not every obedient person is immoral, right? So option D is the correct option choice. According to me, the second passage was of a moderate level of difficulty. And back in 2023, CLAT did happen to ask such questions, right? So all of you who have managed to score a 5 or a full 6 on this, you're doing quite a good job, right? So with that, we come to the end of the session. I hope it was helpful. Please, if you want, you can just go through the entire session again. Stay tuned for the upcoming, weekly practice sessions. It's going to be very helpful for everyone. Ensure you put your comments in the comment section, whatever score you have gotten, whatever doubts you have. Thank you so much, everyone.